I just released a cover of ResuRection. ResuRection was a big hit in I want to say late 90s, early 2000s. It was by a Russian group called PPK, and I've always wanted to cover that song for a long time. And I just released it, and I'm quite happy with it. I do all my mixes, all my compositions, everything using headphones. So I kind of wanted to give you a general rundown of how I approach a project like this, what I do from beginning to the end, so some of the very basic things to be able to ensure that it's a good mix. It sounds good, especially when using headphones. So here's a little segment of it just to give you a taste of what it sounds like. One of the things I do, the first thing I do with anything when I start is doing gain staging. Gain staging is essentially making sure that the combination of all your tracks combined when they're going into your master output are not peaking at 0 dB, leaving some headroom for whether you're mastering it yourself or you're sending it out to be mastered. You're leaving some dynamic range for it to be able to then be properly limited and properly have your dynamic range and not have things overwhelm or distort and basically crushed. So in this one particular instance, every single channel, whether it's a buzz channel or an individual channel, I have here a minus 16 dB. This is not an exact formula. It really depends on what you're doing. But generally speaking, starting at a low point and having to bring things back up a little bit is much easier. And the other thing to keep in mind is that starting at that point means that any effects that you put after that gain are interacting with it at that very specific volume versus if you continue to change it as you're mixing, and that eventually will affect how your entire song sounds. So it's better to start with that idea in mind to make sure that you're on the low end, that you're not hitting that peak that's too strong for your master output. That's the first thing I do. Second thing that I always do, especially if you're using presets, which I oftentimes do, is if you're using different presets, especially if you're stacking presets to get this sound, like this brass stab sound is a bunch of different patches put together to really get this sound going. This is what it sounds like. So this one is three different instances of Massive X and one instance of Spire to get that going. The first thing I do, especially if I'm stacking things, is I always go into the preset and I always remove, if it has delay or reverb, I remove those individually, because every time you stack one of those individual reverbs and delays will start taking up more space, especially in electronic music. Then it's going to be fighting for space and it's going to make everything start to sound muddy. So a general rule would be to remove all that stuff and then go and add your own reverb and delay. And it's better to do as a send so that you're able to fully control it. But even if you're adding it on a bus channel, adding it so that there's one reverb for all your melodies, for instance, for everything else. Delay is the same, especially with delay, because when you have different delay times and they're fighting with each other, you may not be able to hear it, but all that stuff starts stacking up, and therefore it really takes away from the energy of the song. The other thing I do is I always have on my output channel, I always have a gain. This is essentially to make up for me starting at a very low point in all the individual channels. Since everything I set up for this song at minus 16 dB, I have a plus 10 dB just so that when I'm working on the mix, I can, it basically makes up for it, because this is what it sounds like. It's very low. The other reason for this is I also use this mono function here to be able to make sure that everything is where I want it to be. So. Using the simple mono on-off switch, which you can do in a lot of different ways, but I just use it in the gain plugin. It really gives you a good indication as to how everything sounds. It's a really good way to listen to it and make sure if there's anything that's not falling right into place in mono, then you're going to have that problem once it goes into full stereo. The other thing I do is I have this, this is just Logic's plugin, a mixer plugin. But what I have set up here is basically what this is doing is it's taking everything that's below 170 and turning it into mono. This is a personal preference. If you're making club music, electronic music, things like that, I tend to use this often just because I know that everything in that range is going to be mono, and therefore it just has a tighter sound to it. Oftentimes this is done in master. Oftentimes I remove this once I send it out to master, but I like to have it when I do my mixes just so that I know that everything in that area is really mono, and it just cuts through better and then leaves all the stereo field for everything that's above it. The other thing I do, which to me has become really essential, is to have a UV meter. This basically is really a good indication of where the energy of the song is. And so even using gain staging and all that stuff, if it's always lying flat or if it's always in the red, then the song is, for lack of a better word, is just not pumping. So this would be a good example. So I see a lot of movement in that meter, which lets me know that the song isn't overly full, and it's getting a good, the kick and drums are hitting hard, and everything else is sort of moving where it's giving it some dynamic range without it being overwhelming. This specific to doing headphone mixing, I use Sound ID reference. I have these Sennheiser HD 490 Pro Plus headphones, which have been great because they weren't terribly expensive for what they do. They've been great for mixing, and the most important thing is they're really comfortable and lightweight. But what this essentially does is it kind of makes up for some of the frequencies and tries to give you the flattest sounding range possible. So, and they're specific to whether you're using speakers or headphones, they're specific to that. So I always have this on, especially when I'm at the mixing phase, to make sure that I'm hearing the most neutral sounding thing through headphones. And then the other thing I do, which is really my own personal preference, is even though I send all my music out to be mastered, that is the one thing I don't do myself. I send it out to get mastered. I still have an instance of Ozone 11, and I oftentimes just go and pick their electronic preset on there. This is really mainly so that when I'm mixing, I'm able to turn this on and just kind of get a general feel of, once it goes through some kind of mastering chain, how things are going to sound. Because oftentimes, the way you mix things, once they go through anything even as simple as a brick wall limiter, some of the balance on things will change. So this is just a good indicator for me to turn on once in a while just to make sure that I'm in the right general direction with everything. Those are really the main components of what I do when I approach any song. This particular song, I think, has really good energy, and even among some of the stuff I've done recently, I'm pretty happy with it. But those are some of the general things that I do. So really making sure that whether you're using presets to make sure that you're using your own individualized reverb and delay, and that multiple instances can go into that so that you don't have a bunch of reverb stacked on top of each other, a bunch of delays stacked on top of each other. Second thing being that making sure that you're gain staging so that nothing is peaking too hard, and by the time that whether you're mastering yourself or sending it out, you have enough headroom for the mastering engineer to do their thing, still make a song sound dynamic while still maintaining that energy. And really, if you're utilizing headphones, for me, I still always do a final test, the car test. I have an older Bose PA system here that is technically mono, even though it's got speakers that kind of spread in different directions, and it's got a pretty muddy low end. So I always run it through that at the end just to ensure that everything is still proper. But for the most part, the translation between mixing and headphones and the real world has actually done quite well, and it's been a long process to kind of get this fine-tuned. For everybody, it's a very personal thing, so it's going to differ for different people depending on what kind of music you're making, the kind of tools you have, and by all means, you don't need to have a bunch of different tools to do that. Even Logic's internal plugins, including their internal mastering plugin, is plenty to be able to kind of gauge that, even if you're mixing in headphones, and even if you're running directly into one of their newer computers. Anything that's an Apple Silicon architecture, their outputs are actually pretty good so that you can still mix using headphones. But these are some of the tools that I've found to be useful, and that as my mixes hopefully get better over time, they've helped me to ensure that the translation between headphones to the real world do a good job, and also some of these things that I kind of religiously do between some of the basic rules of how I apply it to ensure that it kind of has a good end product. So here's another little section. Just going to play this out just so you can kind of get an idea of how it sounds. Now this is just with Ozone running, so it's not the full master version, but just to kind of give you an idea of how everything, especially when the part of the sound gets a little more complicated, how everything sounds together. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comment section, and I will link the song down below if you'd like to listen to it. Again, this is ResuRection by PPK that I did a cover of that I just released. Thank you.